from Rays of the One Light from Swami Kriyananda, weekly commentaries from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. The inner kingdom. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Most people imagine that the inner kingdom, as Jesus described it, lacks the fascination they attribute to sense life, the bright lights, the diverse attractions, the joys and the laughter. Little do they realize what a vast universe exists in their own selves. There are many passages in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible that describe aspects of this inner kingdom. In the book of Genesis, we read, "And the Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." This garden was no earthly place. It exists even now in the very self of human beings. The legend of Adam and Eve is allegorical. It describes how the first human beings dissipated their spiritual energy centered in the spine. The spine is the channel through which flows the river of baptism and of spiritual life. The Bhagavad Gita tells us the wise speak of an eternal Ashvata tree, with its roots above and its branches below. The tree of life spoken of also in Genesis is the spine. Its roots are above in the brain's energy. Its branches are the outward spreading nervous system. When the sap, which is to say the energy, flows downward, the consciousness is drawn into delusion. On the other hand, when the energy is drawn upward in deep meditation, the consciousness is drawn toward its eternal source, God, and is at last united with Him. Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, therefore urges his chief disciple Arjuna to embrace the yoga science, the path of meditation. The yogi, he says, is greater than the ascetic, greater even than the followers of the path of wisdom, jnana yoga, or of action, karma yoga. Be thou, O Arjuna, a yogi. And for those who would find the divine truth, Krishna gives the description of the yogi. Steadfast, a lamp burns, sheltered from the wind. Steadfastly meditating, solitary. Such is the likeness of the yogi's mind, shut from sense storms and burning bright to heaven. And thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Swami Devaki, and this is Dr. Michelle. And good morning to all of you online, for those who are watching. So, I had an aunt who, at the age of 42, was widowed. And she attended a class a few months after being widowed. And the instructor said and asked all of them to please introduce themselves. And without a doubt, everyone there stood up and introduced themselves as Mrs. So-and-so. And so they were still struggling to find their identity. They were clinging to something. They were holding on to a reality with another individual and claiming that reality as their identity. And for myself, I was, at a young age, very much wanting to be an actress. So I would go and audition for a variety of things. And as a matter of fact, I traveled one time 12 hours by myself in a car. I drove to this audition where you had 1 minute to audition and catch the eye of these people there. And I didn't get it. I had my 1 minute and I didn't get it. Didn't get called back. And that experience, why I put myself through that, I'll never know. It was for the bicentennial, and one of my relatives said, "Well, let's face it, you don't look like Betsy Ross." I thought, okay, all right, fair enough. But I continued to audition, and God seemed to have other plans for me. I auditioned one time, and the woman that was cast in the lead role was Greek, and I'm half Greek. And the director said, well, you both look too much like sisters on stage, so I'm not going to cast you, but would you like to be my assistant director? And I said, oh, okay. I mean, assistant director is not as glamorous as it might sound. It's a lot of organizational things, and you don't have the creativity necessarily. But anyway, I accepted that. And the first day at rehearsal, this woman's name also happened to be Nancy. And that's my given name, Nancy. So we looked like sisters. Her name was Nancy. My name was Nancy. So the first day at rehearsal, someone said, Nancy, and we both looked up. And she said, oh, just call me Nancy K. And I looked at her and said, well, that's my name, Nancy K. Believe it's a true story. And, which makes it even stranger is that she's full-blooded Greek. I'm only half Greek. My mother was not Greek. My grandmother on my mother's side named me. So go figure. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is it would devastate me every time I didn't get cast. There was something in me that was craving an identity other than my own. And Divine Mother has her ways. She has her ways of working around things, humbling us so that she's very creative in that respect. But anyway, so I went on, and when I came to Ananda, very few people really know when you first, many years ago, especially at Ananda Village, that nobody really is terribly interested in what your background is. They don't necessarily know your strengths, your weaknesses, where you came from, what you've done to get to be who you are, what your familial patterns are, who your parents are, who your siblings are. Nobody knows any of that. So then you move on, possibly after that, you maybe move to a center. And then again, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. You go through that whole thing all over again. Your identity's completely stripped. I'm sure many of you have experienced it on one level or another. And then perhaps after that you move to another center. Same thing all over again. Trying to grab onto something, all of us do, try to grab onto some identity, something that says who I am. Whether it's a doctor or a nurse or a minister or a street cleaner or a teacher, whatever. We're always trying to reach for something outside of ourselves to tell us who we are. Now, I had a friend who was in her organization was in an inner circle, and she got sick. She got cancer, and she ended up stepping down from a role that she had as a manager into a lesser role, and she had to heal herself. She had to earn more money, and then she ended up with a divorce. And then she ended up marrying a man who was nowhere engaged or involved in that circle of friends that she once had. And I remember her sitting with me one day. Her cancer became terminal. And I remember her sitting with me one day and she said, I'm nothing. I'm nothing. And many of us, a lot of us who are single, and there's a lot of people that are single today, and it doesn't make us privileged, but I will say that to a certain degree, what you lack when you're single is you don't have a witness to your life. No one knows really what you have been through, what you go through, how you respond to certain situations, why you respond to certain situations. And even if you're married, I would venture to say, I've seen couples that were very committed to one another, but yet they don't necessarily know exactly who the other person is. There's a sweet story. There's a woman, or there's a king and a queen, and they're Danish, And it's a true story. And the queen was giving a birthday party for her husband, for his 50th birthday. And she said, I love the way you laugh at your jokes. I love your sense of humor. She said, we go out to a restaurant and every time the waitress will ask if you're finished and you'll say, no, I'm Danish. And she said, and I love that. And you laugh and everyone there at the table laughs. And I love that about you. But what happens when you get to a point where your whole life is completely wiped out? A fire comes in, takes your house. A war comes in, takes your house, takes your community. 70, 80, 90 years old, you're starting all over again. We go back to, who are we? I'm nothing. But then we start to meditate, and hopefully after we've all come to that conclusion, which I would assure you, most of you will come to that conclusion at one time or another in your life, have felt, I'm nothing. And you go into meditation and you realize, hey, I'm nothing, but it turns into, I'm nothing. I'm nothing. And there's a flip side to that. And what is the flip side? The flip side is, I'm everything. I'm not bound by time. I'm limitless. I am nothing but a soul having a human experience. My identity outside of this reality is nothing. This physical body is nothing. Swami Kriyananda says, stand in a shower, wash your arm and see it dissolve before your eyes. And you see, you're nothing. And yet, we're everything. And we think, even Master, who, when he was a young man, astrology, now I'm not dissing astrology, I think it has real validity here in the East. I know a lot of people follow it, it can be very helpful. But Master went to an astrologer, or his family had his chart read, and they said, you will be married 3 times. You'll be widowed twice. And Master, his father brought to him a woman, and she was beautiful. And Master looked at her, and the first thought that came to his mind was, yes, she's beautiful. Wouldn't it be nice to be married to her? And he said, I completely got that thought out of my mind. And he pushed it aside. He said, my life is that of monasticism. I'm going to become a monk. And then his father took him to see a seer, and the man said, you are destined to be married. You will not find God unless you marry this life. And Master got up and he walked out. And there was a man that was standing close by, and he said, he was a sadhu, and he came over and he said, I heard that, ignoramus. He said, they're wrong. You're destined to be a monk. But the reality is that Master knew that inside him. And it didn't matter who told him that he was going to become something else. He knew inside him what he was going to be. And that was that he was dedicating his life to God. He was going to be a monk. And this is what we all have to do. We all have to come to that conclusion. Now, who is our witness? In reality, they know our karma. They know our past. They know our life. They know the direction our karma is taking us. Master had a young woman that he really respected her. She listened to everything that he told her to do. And except one thing. She would not wear shoes. And he kept saying to her, I want you to wear shoes, but she wouldn't. And Master, when he was going to America, he said to her, I want you to give Kriya Yoga. That's how highly he revered her. I want you to give Kriya Yoga. But I only want you to give it to people that are humble and approach you on that level. And so he went to America. He came back 5 years later, and he said, how many people did you initiate? And she said, not very many, Master, only 5,000. That's how evolved she was. But again, she still would not wear shoes. And Master said, I want you to wear shoes, but she wouldn't do it. And so what ended up happening is she got, through her feet, a disease, and she passed on. And so the shoulds and the oughts that we hear from within, we need to listen to them. We need to listen to those little things that you think don't matter at all. And then you need to ask yourself, who am I in reality? And as the Festival of Light says, for what end was I made? Who am I? I can't tell you that. Master can't tell you that. We all have to go within and find that out. Ask that question from within. But Swami said we've got to get firm within ourselves when we know the truth. Don't let something outside of you distract you from it. Swami, many of you know, I direct a play called The Peace Treaty. It's going to happen. I won't see you all for about a month because I'll be every weekend down at the village rehearsing it. It's going to be performed during Spiritual Renewal Week. But I directed it for many years for Swami. And I remember at one point, it's a decent play. It's 3 acts. It's not going to be that long this time. I've edited it a lot and down to about an hour. But the original production is 3 acts. And there was one point, we would have intermissions. I think we had 2 breaks where people could go and have a snack or something and come back. And there was one major intermission which Swami put in it. Well, I don't quite understand why. It was the way I directed it, I'm sure, but there was a point where people thought it was an intermission. And they would just get up and go to the restroom or go to I don't know why. And I would say to Swami, I think the intermission's in the wrong spot. You don't say that kind of stuff to Swami typically, but I had to at that point. I just couldn't figure it out. And he thought for a moment and he said, no, this is where the intermission is. So it took me a while. I had to struggle with it, but I finally got it and I understood, yes, that was where the intermission was. And once I understood that and understood that rhythm, that's where people would get up and leave. That's where people would get up and go to the restroom, and they stayed, But he stuck to that. You couldn't budge him. If he thought that was the truth, by God, there's no way you could budge him or get him not to do that. He said that Master, even if he wanted to eat a strawberry, would ask Divine Mother's permission. So that's us needing to learn to go within, to find out who we really are, for what end were we made. And even in the Bhagavad Gita it states, even a little practice of this inward communion will free one from dire fears and colossal sufferings. So now I'm going to leave you with a joke. So the rabbi runs into the temple, throws himself down in front of the altar, and he says, oh my God, I am nothing. I am nothing. The assistant rabbi runs in. He throws himself down in front of the altar. Oh my God, I am nothing. I am nothing. And finally the janitor runs in. He throws himself down in front of the temple and he says, God, I am nothing. I am nothing. And the rabbi looks to the assistant and he says, so look who thinks he's nothing. So, God bless you.
Good morning, friends. I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks in regards to not only the reading today, but also just kind of observing what's been going on in my own life and in the lives of those around me. And it's become increasingly apparent to me that for many of us, the ups and downs of our lives, the situations, the circumstances that we find ourselves engaged in, we get so caught up in that this world around us is so utterly convincing. And we get emotionally invested in it. Oh my gosh, you won't believe what so-and-so did to me. oh my goodness, you don't know what happened to me today. And so on. And some of us really enjoy getting caught up in the drama of all of that. And so this question of why are we not aware of this inner kingdom within? It's because all of our energy and our attention and our awareness is directed outside of ourselves, right? And the conclusion that I'm starting to come to as I've been meditating on this is that really all of this stuff that's going on outside of us doesn't really matter. What really matters is who we become through it. Do we let those circumstances bring us closer to God or to take us away? Do we use those circumstances as opportunities for the energy within us to rise toward the spiritual eye? Or do we let our energy fall down? In my work as a physician who specializes in mind-body medicine, I've taught meditation to many, many people. And I've heard a lot of comments about meditation, teaching it. And many people who I've worked with have had a little bit of experience with it already by the time they come to see me. And sometimes one of the things that I hear as a complaint, if you will, is that, well, meditation is boring. And I always chuckle a little bit inwardly when I hear that, because it's sort of like, we have this experience or this expectation that, everything in our life should be, flamboyant or exciting or some kind of big experience outwardly. As the reading said, lights and sounds and all of this, right? And when we first start to sit and focus on the breath, it's not like that at all, at least for most folks. And then, of course, the other very, very common experience I hear is, well, I sit to meditate and my mind just starts spinning around in circles, right? And we've all had that experience. And I normalize that, but that is really the first step of going within, because as Swami Kriyananda writes about in The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, we have all of these different mental citizens within us, all of these different aspects of our consciousness. And when we start to draw our attention from outside within, we start to be able to recognize and see these different mental citizens more and more. And some of them are, shall we say, not our best friends. Some of them do tend to draw our energy down or don't seem to have our highest interest at heart, right? And sometimes they can be very annoying and persistent and challenging to listen to, those thoughts that go through our heads. But if we stick with the practice, and if we begin to interiorize our awareness more and more, we start to begin to develop an awareness of these more subtle realities that exist within us. When I first came on this path and read some of Yogananda's teachings and descriptions of passages in the Bible and Jesus' teachings, I realized sort of for the first time, oh my gosh, like now I finally get it. Like all this stuff about candlesticks and serpents and, fields white with snow, or fields white ready to harvest. Then I finally began to understand what was being said. And I will just share briefly a story. When I was a third-year medical student, I did my psychiatry rotation in Anchorage, Alaska. at the state's only mental hospital that's there. And I was there for 6 weeks. And between the sort of initial lockdown screen that you have to pass and the lockdowns to each of the wards, there was this large atrium, glass ceilings, very high, a lot of natural light coming in, as much as you can get in Anchorage, and a lot of green plants growing. And there were tables and a barista stand there. And during lunch, I would come to this atrium to sit and eat. And if I was the only person there in that atrium, the young woman who attended the barista stand would come up and start talking with me. She was a native Alaskan from Kodiak Island. And she would start telling me stories about her people and her life, but only when I was there by myself. And one day she started telling me about how her people believe that there are these whirling discs of light that are in the center of the body. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're talking about the chakras. How do you know about the chakras? How do your people know about the chakras? Because you and your people have been isolated from India and Asia for thousands of years. And what I realized in that moment was that these teachings about our subtle astral anatomy are not specific to Hindu teachings or the Christian teachings or any specific tradition, but that this is how we are wired as human beings. That this is our spiritual anatomy, and we all have this. And if we quiet ourselves enough inwardly and go within, be still and know, we realize that this is who and what we are. And we begin to experience that energy and that light within us. And as the chant that I sang this morning goes, who is in my temple? All the doors do open themselves, all the lights do light themselves. Yogananda explained that those doors are the chakras. And as the energy rises when we meditate deeply, they open and they shine with that light. And darkness, like a dark bird, flies away, flies away. The spiritual ignorance leaves, and we're left in that light. God bless you all. May we all be one in that light someday.